permits, license for safety along CCUS value chain needs to be accelerated to provide business confidence in investing CCUS. All costs, that means capturing, transport, injection, sorting, vary according to suitability of geology, terrain, and proximity of the industrial cluster. Government supports in the form of tax benefit or credit need to be assessed in each case by governments need to support in building up the CCUS demonstration projects, like NTPC has been able to do that. Industry challenges are there, but commercial, technological, and infrastructure are the barriers of industrial scale for CCUS. Large investment in CCUS need to be accelerated with government supports. For ensuring revenue from such investment, there need to be a market for CCUS products in terms of carbon credit and carbon pricing. Policies and regulations are important for this. Global and regional policies need to work at a speed to get all the carbon market workable. Products from carbon recycling will need to be marketable, aided with government policies. For example, if I'm going to make aggregates, they should find application in the buildings. The building construction rules have to be modified. I can make aggregates for the railroad. They have to be modified, and so on. The business models realizing independent financial institution for CCUS fund regulation, like Carbon Capture Finance Corporation, I think is my idea. Leaders need to develop strategies to create a carbon credit market across key geographies and incentivize private investors by creating attractive financial framework. To sum up, I would say that I think this is a technology which is at the moment is about TRL 4 or 5. To take it to TRL 6 or 8 or 9, I think there has to be a collective effort of the world community, because carbon dioxide is not for one particular nation, it is for the globe. And if we have to work, we have to put all our horses together, put policies, they are supplementing each other, pull policies where their investments are there, create a global market for the products so that there is an investment coming through that, create demands, and all this can happen if there is a synergy among the various nations. And I think G20 will play a major role in coming out with such ideas. Thank you very much. I hope all of us will enjoy your discussions in this particular case. Sorry, gentlemen, we disturbed your sitting arrangement, but I thought I could go to the screen and be a little more.
Thank you, Dr. Saraswat, for that very insightful presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is Mr. Tim Dixon, who's the head of IAGHG, and he's responsible for delivering the technical evidence base to progress carbon capture and storage to members and wider stakeholders, as well as IEAGHG's financial and legal viability. He's the chair of multiple international steering committees, including GHGT conferences, offshore CCS workshop series, the monitoring network, and chair for the advisory committee. Recent examples including GOM Carb in the US and STEM CCS in EU. With these words, I would like to now request him to kindly join us on stage and make his presentation.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank the Ministry of Power and NTPC for the invite to present today. It's a great honor. It's especially an honor for me personally because I'm aware of the work that has to go into the G20 process. I was involved in the first getting CCS in the G8 and G20 processes in 2005 when I was in the UK government. And in the G8, as it was then, we had 5 initiatives on CCS agreed, 2 of those with emerging economies. So it's with great pleasure that I'm here today to present. I wondered what to share with you as G20 countries, and realizing that India has done a lot of work itself and analysis, and we've heard some of that from our presenters this morning. Niti Aayog produced a very good roadmap report that was launched in December just last year for CCS in India, policy approaches. And the Ministry of Power and Natural Gas has also produced a roadmap report last year on CCUS for the oil and gas industry. So what I'm going to talk about is something that's more broader, applicable to all G20 countries and others, and that's the outcomes from the last 2 UNFCCC COPs in terms of CCUS. This should be a broader interest to all, and it's also in the theme of this event today, which, if you've read your program, the theme is encouraging greater international cooperation. So it's fitting with that theme as well. So I'll move on with the slides. I just have to show this first disclaimer slide. And this is because as my organization, IAGHG, we were set up by the International Energy Agency, but we are separate from them. We have separate membership. So anything that I say does not represent the International Energy Agency themselves. But what we are an international research organization, and we fund research into CCUS, technology development and deployment. And we're really proud that India is one of our members. And with this renewed interest in India in CCUS, we look forward to India making more advantage of our membership. We have 37 members who fund our program, and we run the main conference series and many other things on CCUS. So my next slides were just put in for completeness. I'm going to jump over these because you've heard the background on the case and the need for CCUS. And I recommend my colleagues' most recent report last month, ATP 2023. CCUS is one of the 8 pillars for decarbonising the energy sector. And I'm sure you're all familiar also with the IPCC's work, which again, in all the scenarios to achieve 1.5 or 2 degrees, has a lot of CCS in. But where I'm going to is the UNFCCC. Now, there has been a lot of consideration on CCS over 6 years on whether it should be eligible for the clean development mechanism. So if you remember, that was under the Kyoto Protocol, and it was a mechanism for giving carbon credits for projects in developing countries. And 6 years of intense work, and the outcome of that 6 years of work, plus the IPCC's work on the special report for CCS, plus the IPCC's work on the greenhouse gas inventory reporting. In 2006, they produced a specific chapter for CCS that countries have to follow when they're reporting their greenhouse gas emissions, plus the work of the London Convention on regulating offshore CO2 storage. And all of that accumulated in 2011 at COP17, with CCS being accepted in the Clean Development Mechanism with a set of specific rules to ensure the environmental integrity and the carbon accounting aspects. So these were called the modalities and procedures. So these are very important because it sets a precedent under the UNFCCC, allowing CCS to be an eligible project activity and generate the carbon credits equivalent to any other carbon credits from other technologies. It created this incentive for CCS in developing countries. It validated the technology for use in developing countries. It created a de facto regulatory framework to be used, and also it set the precedent for using any future mechanisms for CCS as well. And here we are now looking at the Green Climate Fund and Article 6 as potential applications. So moving forwards then to the Paris Agreement. Oops, gone too far. Which you're all familiar with. And instead of the Kyoto Protocol-based system, this is all countries taking on their pledges for their emissions reductions through their nationally determined contributions, their NDCs, to be updated every 5 years. And that 5 years came with COP26, postponed for 1 year because of COVID, but a very important updating of those early NDCs. So the COP26 had the objective of trying to keep 1.5 within reach, but also there were some parts of the Paris Agreement rulebook that hadn't been completed, and these were the Article 6 parts. Article 6 is about encouraging international cooperation. It's got two significant elements to all the parts of it. One of these is the Article 6.2, which is cooperation between countries, and Article 6.4, which is based around international cooperation based around activities and projects. And so this Article 6.4 is in fact like a new clean development activities in other countries. And Article 6 in its entirety creates a new framework for international cooperation and carbon credit trading between countries. So it's very important in that sense. I think we saw the headline items that came out of the COP26 Glasgow Climate Pact, the updating of the NDCs, not every 5 years, but every year was the request. This acknowledgement about the role of coal power, but with the addition of an important caveat, the phase down of unabated coal power. Unabated means without CCS. That means with CCS is okay. And in the NDCs that got updated, we saw very good progression. Thanks to Climate Action Tracker for working quickly to calculate the trajectories from the new NDCs, if implemented, move us from 2.7 degrees of warming to 2.4. Still not enough, but it's moving in the right direction. And of the NDCs that were updated and those that have come in since, a good number came in to achieve that, but it must be said that not many of them have CCS in them. And the reason for that is these NDCs are looking just to 2030, to short term, and countries were not thinking that they would be using CCS for mitigation in that time period. However, this is very important for countries, particularly emerging economies, who may want to access international climate finance, because such bodies use acknowledgement of CCS in a country's climate policy as one of the conditions for funding through climate finance. So having CCS in your NDCs or in your technology needs assessments is very important for that reason. But as well as the NDCs under the Paris Agreement, a very important other aspect are these requirements for long-term low greenhouse gas emission development strategies to the mid-century. So these make countries look beyond 2030 to the middle of the century. And I've just updated this yesterday. Very pleased to see still that the majority of these have CCS in, as countries realize they're putting the easier to do mitigation in their NDCs, but looking past that, they have to go further. And India's was submitted just in November last year and includes CCS in that. So moving on to the last COP, COP27 in Egypt. Not so many new NDCs were submitted, but in the Sharm el-Sheikh implementation plan, the umbrella agreement that came out, it repeated this phase down of unabated coal power, even though some countries wanted to broaden that to phase out of unabated fossil fuels. It encouraged countries to continue updating their NDCs, and it also created the fund for loss and damage that you probably saw in the news for supporting poorer countries from the impacts of climate change. It included also in the energy section further encouragement for low emission and renewable energy. By low emission, that does include CCS on fossil energy. So the overall framework for the Article 6 was agreed in COP26 in Glasgow, but the details are still being worked through. In particular, for the 6.4 mechanism, It's now, last year, put in place the supervisory body, and it's been charged with developing not just its governance, but also specifically how to consider removals, that is taking CO2 from the atmosphere. And they've set up the supervisory body to do this, and it's looking at removals of CO2 both through land-based and nature-based solutions, and also through engineered carbon dioxide removal. And in the first meetings, there was some pushback against the engineered CDR. And as you probably know, engineered CDR is primarily direct air capture with carbon capture and storage, and bioenergy with CCS BECCS. And what's happened, I think, in my view, is that since CCS was agreed in the CDM 12 years ago, and in the previous work by the IPCC, there's a whole new generation of negotiators there. And one of our jobs has been to remind them that the hard work on the regulation for environmental protection and on the carbon accounting of CO2 geological storage, that hard work has been done in the Clean Development Mechanism and in the EU ETS, for example, and in international regulations such as the London Protocol. So we've input those to the supervisory body, and there's a further call for more submissions for information on monitoring, reporting, etc., etc. So I think we have to be careful here that there's no bias gets introduced intentionally or unintentionally into this new mechanism. So my last slide. To sum up, on international cooperation in CCUS, as a low carbon technology, it's already well characterized by a lot of international cooperation, in my view. We have initiatives such as the SEM CCUS, the Carbon Sequestration Leadership Forum, ourselves, IAGHG, and the Global CCS Institute already demonstrating that. But it needs more, because there's only a smaller number of countries doing CCS at the moment, and they should be encouraged to share with other countries who may be interested in CCS. Countries need funding, particularly emerging economies need to be supported as they start to assess CCS for themselves. Capacity building, national assessments for storage and for sources of CO2. And we do have the Green Climate Fund that's to support low carbon activities, mitigation activities. It has explicitly in its governing instrument that set it up that CCS should be supported, but it hasn't supported any projects yet. But it's there in principle for emerging economies to use. The Asian Development Bank and the World Bank have their CCS trust funds, and they've supported many good projects and work in capacity building and setting up centers of excellence in various countries around the world. And what we have coming along now is the details for Article 6, putting in place the frameworks for international cooperation and the recognition through carbon credits and carbon trading and the financial remuneration for CCS projects and other low carbon projects as a result. And my last point is just that vigilance is, whilst negotiations are ongoing and the details are being developed, countries should be vigilant just to make sure that it remains, the Article 6 remains technology neutral and doesn't bias against CCUS. But overall, with the overall policy messages, and as we've heard earlier, it's looking strong that we need CCUS. Countries are realizing that in their long-term low greenhouse gas strategies for the mid-century. And we're getting in place the frameworks for international carbon trading. And actually the hard work on the carbon accounting rules, that's all been done already. So with that, thank you very much for listening. And I'll be around afterwards if people have got questions.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon, for that very pertinent and succinct presentation in respect to international cooperation role in CCUS. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is Dr. Nicholas Musioka, who's a principal research scientist at the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research in South Africa. He's a Future Leaders African Independent Research Fellow a C2 rated National Research Foundation scientist, and an affiliate of the African Academy of Sciences. Dr. Musioka leads several hydrogen technologies related development projects with some particular focus on green methanol, composite cylinders, materials based hydrogen storage, biogenic biogas derived turquoise hydrogen production, among other energy related projects. With these words, may I now request you to kindly make your presentation.
I'd like to take this opportunity firstly to thank the organizers of the event for the great and wonderful invitation to come and share some of our thoughts about the CCUS space. The good doctor who presented the initial plenary speech gave a very good justice to some of my initial slides that I intended to talk to you, so I'm not going to reinvent the wheel and repeat myself with that. So I'm just going to briefly scan through because some of the items have already been talked about, and just focus specifically on some of the areas of interest in the South African space, looking at some of the government-driven initiatives, and of course also briefly touch about some of the technological development endeavors at my institute, which is the CSIR. So thanks a lot, and I'm going to skip through the Yeah, so I thought of, first of all, sharing with you the global view of the net zero. I think I got this updated slide in terms of the net zero commitment that are happening. And importantly, is just to highlight where South Africa is currently sitting on in terms of the commitment, because some of these net zero commitment are already captured in the policy documents that the government has already put forth, which is something good, because when you look at the developments that are happening in the G20 countries, it looks like things are going on the right trajectory, and what is needed is just heightened endeavors to make sure that all goes on well. Now, looking at the global imperatives and the drivers for the CCUS, I won't really delve into much, but to summarize, the challenges that were highlighted by the good doctor today was that there are technological challenges. Of course, there are financial challenges, and of course, there is a need to make sure that government support is actually quite brought forth to make sure that some of these technologies are well supported. So I will not really delve into that because, good doctor, you've really done justice to that. Now, this is also been shared in terms of the CCUS value chain. I thought it's a very important slide because it breaks down in terms of what needs to be done in terms of the capture, transportation, the challenges have been highlighted, and of course the important part of it, which is my area of interest, is in the utilization space, which I will be sharing with you. I will not really talk about the development because a summary has been given with regard to the projects that are taking place globally. And of course, ranging from 2019 to 2021, a lot of good things have happened. Technology readiness level is also just an highlight to say that there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the utilization space, meaning that there's need for investments. When you look at the research, development, and the demonstration phase, and you look at the colors in terms of what has happened in the demonstration phase, you realize the capture technologies are doing pretty well. And of course, also trailing behind is the utilization space, which needs really to be looked at. This is a slide of the energy requirement and the various levelized cost of carbon capture. You realize that when you look at the concentration of the CO2 that is produced from various sources, you see that the energy requirement actually does decline with the increasing CO2 concentration, which is something good, especially for the people who are working into the capture aspects of it. And of course, the cost for this capture typically, and of course it has been mentioned that it drives the total cost of the CCS. Importantly, I just wanted to highlight this slide of what South Africa is currently looking at. We already have plans to have a pilot plan for the CO2, for the carbon capture online by 2023. This is a slide that is from one of our colleagues who is working at the Council for Geosciences in South Africa. So this is work in progress, and it means that sooner or later, we should be able to be contributing to the effort that is being done globally. Having said that, the utilization space has tremendous opportunities. And when you look at some of the items that have been highlighted there in terms of the utilizing this in either directly or indirectly, especially in the production of chemicals, other materials, polymers, and yeah, fuels. I think it creates a good opportunity, but I won't really delve into it. But I thought it was important just to say that a lot of work we know is being done. Of course, we've highlighted the existence of large-scale CCS projects in the world, various parts of the globe. And of course, the deployment of the utilization aspect is still lagging behind, and I think this needs urgent attention and, of course, funding consideration to make sure it is well taken care of. Policy instruments, these are very important because without the policy instruments from the government side of things, things do not really go on very well because as scientists and researchers and engineers, people tend to be too much fixated into whether the technology works or it does not work, but without proper support of the RDI, funding either from basic to applied sciences, very little happens. Of course, looking at the carbon taxes, I think that is also an important thing because if you penalize the polluter, then they have the responsibility to take advantage of those pain points and make sure that they can, at least they can invest some of their profits into this technological development. Regulatory aspects, you can never run away from it. Of course, you can actually use the public procurement regulations. Border adjustment, we know it's happening quite well in Europe. And these are just a few things that could be done to accelerate the deployment of these CCU as technologies. Now delving to the points of interest in terms of South Africa's imperatives of why we really need to do this. I mean, we've made various commitments in the world. COP21 is an important one. Of course, we are endowed with extremely good natural resources that could actually support some of these technologies, especially those that are linked to the hydrogen economy, because you can never run away from hydrogen if you really want to talk about decarbonizing, whether it is the transportation sector or even other sectors that are known to produce a lot of CO2. So it's important to take note of that. Of course, we have various regulatory frameworks that have been published. And of course, the important one is the one that's, for example, mandating the what you call the blending of the diesel pool. And of course, the blending, I mean, you can imagine how much contribution it will play. We have various government policies. For example, the Integrated Resource Plan, National Development Plans, and the National Climate Change Response Policies. And of course, the recent establishment of what we call the Coal CO2 to X national program, which is one of the catalytic anchors for the recently launched South African Hydrogen Society roadmap. I understand that India launched his roadmap in the course of, I think this year, if I'm not wrong. Now, when you look at the private sector imperatives, it's very important to note that, of course, South Africa has introduced what you call the carbon tax into law. Of course, the tax is really low to really have a significant impact as we go. But we know as time progresses on, it's going to start biting and people are going to get interested, especially the bigger polluters. Of course, we know very well initially when the technology or the techno-economics are not making sense. Some of the bigger players are still hesitant to delve into these technologies. But importantly is that we are seeing some companies starting to warm up. And a good example is one of our biggest gas to liquid technology company, Sasol. And we know that the expertise that lies within this petrochemical industry is quite enormous to make sure that it can support the implementation and acceleration of these technologies. But things are happening behind the scenes. We hope to hear more from those and even other players. Now, I talked about the Coal CO2 program. What is it? It's actually one of those catalytic programs that has been identified. And this is very important, especially in South Africa, because South Africa, as some of you might know, is one of the pushers of the just energy transition. Now, when you talk about just energy transition, you cannot avoid the disturbance that will be there if people just jump straight without having that transition because of the losses of jobs. South Africa is heavily reliant on coal. We rely on over 90% of our electricity generation from coal combustion. So you can imagine all the jobs that are there. So if we just transition without careful thinking and how to preserve those jobs, we run at a risk of having chaos. And I don't really think it is only South Africa alone. India, the same thing. Other developing countries, the same thing. And I think this is something that really needs to be supported. And the nice thing is that the government, through the Department of Science and Innovation, the DSI, have come up with this interesting and very nice project that is very well interlinked with the roadmap, Hydrogen Society roadmap. And it talks about taking advantage of the CO2 emissions in the coal combustion sector, going through to extracting valuable things. For example, molecules that could be, or chemicals that could contribute into the fertilizer production, coupling it with the green hydrogen space, production of diesel, which is quite good. And of course, at the end of the day, you can actually see the opportunities that it could actually create with regard to the various commodities that we know are currently traded and could substitute some of the existing ones. So the program itself is quite important, and I think we cannot really talk about this without looking at where are we currently and what are we aiming tomorrow. We know that currently, like I did say, that yes, we have a lot of CO2 emitting coal-fired stations. We know that there are already assets there. We do not really need to reinvent anything. All we need to do is just to take advantage of that CO2 and see how we can actually utilize it. Now, for the transitional part of it, and when we try to liaise it with the Hydrogen Society roadmap, we know that currently with the CO2 or installations for the power generation, it's the gray hydrogen. The blue hydrogen goes hand in hand with the capture part of it. And of course, with the utilization part of it, just to make sure that we can actually take advantage of, for example, the sulfuric acid that we can actually produce from the sulfur in the flue gas. Talking about the fertilizer salts. But tomorrow, the essence is actually now to try and integrate the green hydrogen produced from renewable energy sources, such that at least we can be able to integrate this holistic design to make sure that we can actually now start greening up things. But of course, this will take some time, and that's why we're saying it is tomorrow's vision, but we have to start with where we are at the moment. And I think this is a good way of trying to make sure that as we move away or slowly transition from the coal dominated energy towards what we all endeavor to do, which is the renewables, I think it has to be done systematically without having to move with our feelings or make sure that we avoid all the negativities that could happen from there. Now, how is this coal CO2 program itself interplaying with various entities or hubs, just to make sure that we can actually implement it, because it is a newly launched thing. Of course, you can actually see that there is a good need to make sure that there is government involvement from a policy perspective, and of course also integrating with academia and existing institutions, making sure that we have international collaborations. For example, you can actually see some of the names there with the Fraunhofer, to make sure that at least we can actually localize some of these technologies in South Africa as we develop our own, so that we don't really reinvent the wheel like I did start during my early thing. And of course, it's not just ending at IP generation and localization of technology. It's also looking at how do we really make these things big and workable? And how do we really work with commercial entities, just to make sure that the support is not just from government side of things. There's that public-private interactions. But of course, this model is actually meant to make sure that we can actually avoid the three chasms that are embedded in the ideation part of it, transitioning from lab scale to demonstration phases, making sure that we can actually de-risk some of the pilot plans. This will require a lot of effort and work, but it's something that when accomplished, will actually bring in very good fruits to the country, and could be a good model for other developing countries to embrace. Now, among my last few slides, this is what the government is looking at through the DSI itself. in terms of the phasing out. Of course, it will start with the piloting part of it, going to the demonstration, and later to the long-term aspect, which is 2024, 2030, aligning with the roadmap itself, the hydrogen roadmap itself. And of course, once this rollout is done, technically is going to support actually the export of the green hydrogen in the country in one way or another, which is something that will need to be done. And of course, also making sure that as we retire or repurpose some of these existing old coal power stations, at least we do it more carefully. South Africa is not to the thoughts of trying to completely say that you're running away from coal. We know that's going to be there for some time, but it requires just slowly transitional thought process and making sure that all the things that needs to be considered are considered. Of course, there are other catalytic projects, which is, this is one of the examples, is the Power-GoI catalytic projects. The design itself in terms of where they're located, you can actually see where some of the deepest seaports are, whereby some of these products that I talked about, for example, the green ammonia, would be expected to countries that would actually require that. Looking at taking advantage of, especially on the central side of the country, where there is a tremendous solar irradiation, to take advantage of the renewable solar energy there would be something quite good. And of course, trying to interface with where some of the CO2 emissions are taking place. You can actually see areas like Mpumalanga, sulfuric acid production site. And of course, you can actually see where the export hubs are going to be for these products that I just talked about. Now, sustainable aviation fuel. A lot of people have been saying that for us to decarbonize the aviation sector, there's a need for us to make sure that we also start thinking about how do we really start doing it from the word go. And of course, these are some of this is also another catalytic project that's looking at how the Hydrogen Society roadmap can potentially contribute into decarbonizing this, not just in South Africa, but even exporting this sustainable aviation fuel. And remember, I did mention that the country is well positioned with technologies that have been there, and all they require is just a plug and play, especially with the Sasol Fischer-Tropsch technology. And of course, it is known to be quite leading. And of course, this will require integration of both local players and international players to see it in fruition, and that's why we cannot really claim to be able to do it alone. Of course, the government has to step in and has already done that in terms of supporting the feasibility studies that are required for that, just to make sure that it can only convince the local players, but also the international players in this space. Now, I'd like to talk about some of the technological development things. It was mentioned that I do lead a research team that's looking at those technologies. And one of it is actually in the space of the biogas space. When you look at the current existing technologies, looks at the biogas generation and utilizing it for cooking applications or just electricity generation, but inefficiently. So once you start doing the biogas cleaning, of course, you remove the hydrogen sulfide. It makes it even much easier for people who are small-scale users in their farms to be able to use it without the bad smell, of course. Once you start going to upgrading side of things, then at least now you start getting the quality of methane. That's very important. But the purpose for this kind of research is not actually to compete with the major players, because some of these technologies are well known. We are looking at finding a solution that's applicable in the local context, and that's where modularity comes in. If we can get these biogas upgrading systems at a modular level, accessible to small-scale farmers at a cost, if they would want to make money, of course, it's all about integrating all these modular units and scaling it up. Of course, we've done a bit of techno-economics. We have an idea at what scales it would make sense, because a lot of people make mistakes in terms of just installing biogas for commercial purposes, but they end up failing because the economics do not make sense. So we have a different picture of looking at it. It makes a lot of sense. And it is known that in Africa, modular units for biogas upgrading are not available. But the most important thing is the high value one, which is now the methane pyrolysis from biomethane. Cracking it to produce hydrogen, at the same time solid carbon. It contributes very well to the topic of discussion today. Now, if we are able to get, for example, the modular unit that you're seeing on the other side, which is something that you're currently testing, it would make a lot of sense to start looking at whether should we scale it up, should we leave it there, how do we improve the catalyst, because catalyst development is also one of our key considerations, just to make sure that the deactivation is taken care of, it can stay for longer, and things like that. And of course, yeah, the techno-economic studies. These studies are very important so that we don't just shoot ourselves before we start any work. The other part that was talked about, and it was quite nice to see the NTPC in terms of the methanol demonstration. We have those thoughts. We've done a bit of survey to look at what is happening globally. South Africa, we can't really claim to be there yet, but we do have the vision. We have even thought about demonstrations at my institute for the green methanol using captured CO2. And of course, making sure that at least we have like a roadmap that will support this RDI. And of course, there are also news in the media talking about demonstration of e-methanol plant in South Africa. I do suppose that they're still doing their feasibility studies, but it is proven elsewhere, so it should be able to work. The question is, what feedstock do you need to use, and how do you make the local advantages support positive techno-economics? Now, the power to methanol. I did talk about what you're trying to look at. Of course, there was talk about the utilization of the CO2 captured from the flue gas. What about capturing the CO2 and integrating it with the biogas space to even make it even more greener? You know, renewables, I can't really talk about that. What about the visions of going from green methanol to dimethyl ether? It's not a very big technological jump. All you need is just a different set of catalysts. Of course, aviation fuel, we know that methanol is one of the alcohols that can be used for the COD process, the olefins process. And of course, that is what we currently have at a demonstration stage. That is around TRL number 4, no, TRL number 5 heading to 6, with a vision of heading to multi-liter scale quantities. We envy the NTPC methanol plant, and we look forward to see how we can actually learn from that. But of course, in a way, looking at the feedstock part of it. And of course, the vision is just to make sure that we can actually move to where the big players are. Of course, we know the recently launched Sunli plant in China, doing tremendous amount of work, and of course, other progress that's happening globally. Of course, we're looking at how we can actually partner with people who are ahead of us in terms of the methanol process optimization, either from a reactor design point of view, and of course, the catalyst design, which is something that I'm strongly pushing in my research team. So having said that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nicholas Musioka, for giving us your insightful presentation and sharing the South African perspective with us. Up next, ladies and gentlemen, we have with us Ms. Yukimi Shimura, Director Planning and Development Department from the MUFG Bank Limited from Japan. She's taking a role as an in house consultant for the bank's sustainability initiatives, especially on transition, finance, and innovative technologies to assist customers in the journey to carbon neutrality. With over 15 years of experience as a consultant for energy and environmental issues and ESG matters, Ms. Shimura has worked with various projects related to CCUS, including studies on legal and regulatory framework. She also has an extensive experience on carbon accounting and development of GHG emission reduction calculation methodologies. And with these words, I would like to now request her to kindly come here and make her presentation.
Shri Alok Kumar, Shri Gurdeep Singh, Shri UK Bhattacharya, experts and dignitaries, and ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to thank Ministry of Power and NDPC for inviting me over to this esteemed seminar. And I think many of my the other presenters already mentioned many things that I'm actually going to talk today. So I would skip many slides or would try to be concise. But for those of you who are not familiar with MUFG Bank, MUFG Bank is actually the largest bank in Japan, and we are committed to the carbon neutrality by 2050, including our portfolio. So it is very important for us to really assist our clients to achieve net zero carbon neutrality, and this is the reason why CCUS is important. Now, Mr. Singh mentioned that the 40% of emission coming from India is from power. In Japan, it's actually 50%, including heat. We are having a big trouble. But from the financial community, we have a term called managed phased out. Managed phase out from the coal-fired power plants or the fossil fuel power plants. What is important
40%
for
of
us is
emission
energy
coming from
security,
India
just
is
like
from
you
power.
mentioned.
In
Sir,
Japan, it's actually 50%,
and
including
also,
heat. We are
the
having
managed part, and I think this is something that we can collaborate with each other because the climate change is not just a single country's issue; it's for the whole global issue. But we can together work on this. And another important point is a just transition. We have to care about the employments. We have to care about those people who are working for this fossil fuel industry. So again, this is something that is very important for everyone. Now I will skip slides. This is just a statistics for the pipeline of a commercial CCUS
to care about those people who are
facilities,
working
but in fact, this
for
is
this
CCS.
fossil
And
fuel industry.
unfortunately,
So
we don't see
again,
similar things
this is
in
something that is
CCU.
very
And
important
we do know that the CCU is still
for
new, and we
everyone.
don't have much
Now I will
statistics.
skip
But from a financier's point of
slides.
view, we'd like to see
This
something
it's
similar.
just
So if the government of India
a
or
statistics for
NDPC can
the
work on this to come up with a global scale, that would actually help the financial community. Now, I was requested by our organizer to present some of the best practices. So what I did was I picked up two projects. One is CCS, another is CCU. On the left-hand side is CCS. It's a red trail energy. It's actually it's the ethanol. They actually installed a new storage facility right next to the ethanol plant. And what they did was they now capturing about 180,000 tons of CO2, and then actually injecting rate is about 500 tons per day. But good thing about this is that the government fully supported, and they're still supporting it. And also the academia is supporting, and right now they are conducting the monitoring exercises using the research funds in a collaboration with Japan. So that is another thing that we can probably take a look at. On the right-hand side is the Shunli CO2 to methanol. This is a CCU project, and what they did was they established a new methanol production plant right next to the coke oven plant, and they capture the CO2 coming from the exhaust from the coke oven, and then produce the methanol. I think this is an interesting case for India as well. And what they do is they um, capture about 160,000 tons of CO2 per year, and the capex is about roughly about 90 million US dollar, and somehow they managed to do the debt and equity financing. Now, a lot of things being talked about the bankability and talked about how the private sector can actually jump into CCUS projects. This is just a few things what the bankers usually look at when we start evaluating the projects, let alone risks. And now the nutshell of this is that the business model is most important. Now we can actually adapt the business model from outside of the country, but then it needs to be localized. It needs to have the local context reflected into that. And also we need to make sure that whatever, especially for the CCU, the off-takers of the product that you're producing would be attractive enough. So it has to provide the conditions that would make them attractive, interested in purchasing your product, whether it is a green methanol or any other CCU products. And one of the things I like to highlight and not be mentioned by my previous presenters is about the emission reduction calculations. Now, in terms of the CCU, it's usually done by the life cycle analysis, and they usually calculate. And from the financier's point of view, we like to make sure that the way you calculate is being recognized or use some kind of a standards. Uh, Either is this national or international and recognized by the international community. And with that, it's very important for us to calculate how much of a benefits the people can actually achieve. And if it's recognized by the government, that is also very important, especially for the carbon pricing. Now, this is just the risk profile that we usually looked at for the project financing. On the right-hand side, just examples of risk. We have an unexhausted list, so this is just an examples. You can take a look at this, but what is more, the first important thing is the cash flow. We like to have a long-term contract and make sure the revenue is constantly come. So if the government can provide some kind of incentive frameworks that can actually guarantee these kind of things, that's very important and interesting for the financial communities. Now, another thing is that, and this is especially true for the CCUS, is a regulatory framework. At the end of the day, the financiers or the insurers want to make sure that whatever would happen, we like to know who will take the responsibilities. And the only source that we can check is the regulatory framework. And for this reason, we always ask the government and what exactly the law says and regulation said, and who pays what kind of a things if something happens. If it's not clear, we can always find a solution and de-risking, especially de-risking specifically for the issues, the risks that is not covered under the conventional framework. So this is my last slide. Because we have government representatives also, as well as the private representatives, I like to point out it's important and it's really essential to have a public-private partnership if we want to finance CCUS. CCUS projects, if it's 100% government funded, perfect. That's nice. But then if we want to deploy a huge emission reduction projects, we need this finance from the private sectors like us. Now, in order for us to really, provide the debt financing or the equity financing, we need the government support and clarifications. The first thing is that, as many have mentioned already, unfortunately, CCS projects so far is very expensive and it's not bankable. So we need the government to find a way so that it can actually make it attractive for financing, but also reduce the risk and probably have a partnership for the risk sharing. Another thing I've already mentioned is about the regulatory framework. We need clarifications on that. The third thing I've already mentioned is the guidance for CO2 accounting, especially for CCU. And if someone can show it to us, then we will feel comfortable financing and we will be more and more convinced. Now, predictability and reliability is another key word. Predictable in terms of the revenues, predictable in terms of the risks associated with, reliable is of course the continuation of operation, especially when it comes to CCU. We're dealing with the new technologies, so we want to make sure that the technology that you're introducing will be functional for next 10, 20 years or so. So reliability is another important aspect. Incentive schemes enough been said, but it needs to be localized. We can import the business models from the UK, business model from the US, from the other countries, but there should be a way for India, a business model for India, and we like to see how the financial community can actually assist you to come up with this business model. And the last thing, This is usually happen with just the normal project. Project developers prepare project business model, and then comes to the bankers and say, here it is, could you please finance? We see many risks. We see many points that we thought that if we were together with them from the beginning, maybe we could have find a solution. But with the points that's been presented in front of me, maybe very difficult. So from that perspective, I always ask government people and also for the project developers to include the financiers and insurers to talk with you, develop the business model so that together we can find a solution. With this, I'd like to end my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Shimura, for your informative presentation and also sharing with us the perspective from Japan. Ladies and gentlemen, with this we conclude the plenary session. Thank you very much to our esteemed speakers for their deliberations. We will now move to our next session, which are presentations on the international studies which were done by NTPC Netra in collaboration with the study partners and knowledge partners. I'd like to mention here that 3 international studies were done on addressing technology gaps through collaboration in CCUS, HEFC, and ACC, and 2 international studies on financing needs for new age critical clean energy technologies, BES and CCUS. The overview on the studies on both CCUS reports shall be shared with you. So we are very pleased to have with us 2 very notable and esteemed speakers for this session, Sri Atanu Mukherjee, CEO of Dastur Energy, and Professor Amit Garg from IIM Ahmedabad. Our first speaker is Dr. Atanu Mukherjee, CEO of Dastur Energy, a Texas-based energy technology firm. He has worked with the US Department of Energy, the US National Carbon Capture Center, Government of India, and the Government of UAE on the policy, technology, and economics of gasification, methanol, hydrogen, and related carbon capture mechanisms for low carbon fuels, clean power, clean chemicals, clean steel, and the oil and gas industries. So we will now commence this firstly with Sri Atanu Mukherjee's international study presentation, which is on CCUS energy transition through addressing technology gaps. May I now request him to kindly take over?
Thank you very much. I think that, like all our speakers mentioned before, CCUS is going to be a very important complement to be able to decarbonize our entire society across the world, not only G20 countries in India. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit is some of the challenges and technology gaps that needs to be addressed to be able to take CCUS to the next level in terms of both innovation to be able to decarbonize our entire society across the world, not only G20 countries in India. So what I'm going to talk about a little, how effective is it from a perspective of economics of implementation? How effective is it from a perspective of looking at what support it requires from a perspective of the cost and efficiency so that it's deployable and scalable over a period of time? A lot of things have been said already, and I think I'll skip the details that have been already talked about, but a specific snapshot out here is one that I want to bring out is got to do with the fact that we are talking about gigaton scale, right? And that's very different from million ton scale. All the implementations in the world, if you look at US implementations, if you look at implementations in Snohowitt in Norway, some Canadian implementations, they're all million ton implementations. For us to get to any effective implementation of CCUS at scale, we have got to go to GT scale implementation. That's quite a leap from the current state that we have got. It's a challenge that needs to be addressed and needs to be solved. And I think that's important because if you look at the scale of the operation, and I think Dr. Sarswat mentioned about this whole thing around the need for baseload and thermal power generation, although there'll be a lot of penetration of renewables, If you look at from a perspective of baseload and continuity and availability of power, fossil fuels will continue to play an important role in the foreseeable future in many, many countries, right? And therefore, the ability to apply mechanisms of decarbonization like CCUS to thermal power is going to be important. So 14.3 gigatons to 12.8. That's the probable reduction we're talking about in about 10 years. Look at steel, cement, refineries and chemicals. These all are the basic pillars of an economy. And there's no substitutes we got for these pillars. And because these pillars of economy or industrial processes consume carbon as a basic element, not only for combustion, but for reduction, for the chemical process, there is no way that in the foreseeable future you can transition away into some other process. And therefore, you have to have carbon capture for decarbonizing those parts of the industry from perspective of taking the carbon down. So fossil fuels will continue to be a big part of the energy mix. CCUS is going to be essential, imperative if you want to move forward. And I think R&D and technology development, along with its economics and policy, needs to be focused in a very integrated and collaborative manner to really take CCUS to GT scale. And I think that's the challenge that we have got, and that's the challenge that we need to address, and that we talked about in the report that's come out. How do we take it to GT scale, and what are the challenges in technology and R&D to make it happen? Here's again a little bit more detail in terms of what the sectoral emissions are and what is amenable to what. So CCUS, as you know, is basically for fixed point, meaning that you have got fixed points of emissions that you can take capture carbon from that. It's not necessarily amenable to mobile or moving points of emissions. But again, the other challenge in CCUS is how do we look at what is capturable from fixed points too? Because many of these industrial plants have many points of emissions. And more the points of emissions, the more is the cost and more is the effort, right? And therefore, the actual amenable CCUS emissions that you see out here is less than what is capturable. And that's been shown out here. And so if you look at some of the areas where it makes sense, if you look at coal-based plants, much more amenable. Capture concentration is about 10, 12, 13%. And therefore the cost of capture is lesser. Scale is obviously higher. If you look at steel plants, this is one, particularly for India, China, and some of the other countries, is very relevant because and Japan too, 70% of the emissions, 70% of steel production in these countries will continue to be based on blast furnace-based route, which is basic iron ore, not based on recyclable steel, unlike US. And therefore, it will continue to have CO2 as an emission point unless something else comes in the near future, which is unlikely at least for the next few decades. So therefore, we need to have a way to figure out how cost effectively and economically we have technology options for taking BF-BOF CO2 capture in a way which makes sense. And also there are mechanisms that by which you can look at how to take the waste gas from blast furnaces and utilize that more effectively by taking hydrogen out, clean hydrogen out, and look at different choices, for carbon capture. And cement plants, same thing, right? You can, there's an option in terms of how we can take CO2 out. And finally, the most expensive, I believe, is refineries and chemicals because there are many points of capture, and the leanness of the CO2 is pretty high, and therefore the capture cost is higher. And there's an urgent need to see how we can look at reducing the capture cost and improve technology to be able to capture from lean sources. If I go to the next slide, and then, like I said, that it's important for us to look at technology and R&D in conjunction with policy, economics, and frameworks. And so if you look at some of the policies that are there in place in the United States, it's sort of a credit-based policy, which I think helps a lot in terms of kickstarting a lot of these projects, both from a capital and operational cash perspective. Canada is output-based pricing system. UK and EU has with ETS system. India is developing something. We're working with NITI Aayog on making this happen. Australia, some amount of what we call CCUS policies, but policies is important to drive the adoption of CCUS at scale. And I think here's some CCUS initiatives India has undertaken, which I think is very interesting and very exciting. NTPC, as we all know, leads in terms of developments and catalysts, development, in some of the capture systems using PSA, development of some of the pilot projects in methanol, and carbon capture and so on and so forth. There are others also that are being worked on in terms of pilot level of operation. You have tuticorin alkaline chemicals, which is one of the first CO2 capture projects in India, right in the southern part of India, which is making baking soda. We have some work at BHEL in terms of coal to methanol. In the oil and gas sector, we have been working on some design of capture systems from something called the hydrogen generation units for EOR. And also in petchem, BPCL, something on petco gasification, and steel, Tata Steel is working on a 5-TPD capture unit, and JSPL, another steel plant, working on a larger capture unit for CO2 capture and processing. Some work in cement and Dalmia cement. So there's a spattering of things that's happening, which needs to be scaled up and move forward in terms of impetus and deployment as we move forward. Here are some of the gaps that we thought might be useful to look at in the industrial emitters and the power sector. Specifically in carbon capture, the two factors. One is the commercially proven systems. And commercially proven systems have been working for quite some time. Unlike what people think, there have been commercially proven systems based on amines and physical solvents like Selexol and Vectisol and solvents out here too, have been there for many, many decades, used in the oil and gas industry. The question becomes, how do I apply to much larger scale, right, in gigatons? And that's got to do with innovation and systems engineering, right? How do you combine the Lego blocks in a way which optimizes heat and power consumption, reduces a lot of the energy consumption, and also look at how do we look at alternative solvents in terms of plugging the gaps. One of the problems with any of these amine-based systems or any of these chemical solvent-based systems is that they have high energy of binding. The moment the high energy of binding, releasing the CO2 takes a lot more energy, and that consumes energy, right? And on the other hand, some of them have got low reaction rates, which basically means the amount of the volume of the towers required for capturing that is much larger and increases the capex. And these are opposing what you call technological phenomena. So you got to figure out a way how to optimize this. So I think alternative absorbers and solvents is important in terms of driving the technology forward in commercial technologies. One of the areas that I think a lot of people talk about, and we have mentioned in the report, has got to do with DAC, DAC, direct air capture. Now, this is very important in terms of flexible capture, but we think it's far out in terms of commercial viability, scaled commercial viability. It is very possible to have capture from direct air, but the concentration of air is so low, the energy consumption is very, very high. And so unless you have new catalysts, right, and you have new chemistry, new materials, getting the cost down to something reasonable is going to take time. And I think also the land area required is very, very large, because you are trying to take a large volume of air and sucking it through a big, what you call, mesh. And given the concentration, you've got a lot of volume to suck it, and therefore the land area is very large. So you need to have new contactor technologies that you've developed. So I think it's an area to concentrate on and look at DAC as a future. I think transportation is largely known. I think the question is, how do you organize pipes and shipping systems in a way which makes more sense from a scale and economics perspective. And I think, like a lot of people mentioned earlier, speakers mentioned earlier, utilization is going to be key, but that can only solve a part of the problem, unfortunately. And I think, like Dr. Saraswat mentioned, others mentioned, we have to have a storage complement. There's no going around it. If we want to decarbonize, we have to have the right combination of utilization along with a complement of storage to be able to get to the right kind of CCUS abatement across the different sectors of the economy. So a couple of areas, I think, building materials give the biggest scope in terms of conversion. Fuels and chemicals, I think people talked about it, methanol, and nanomaterials to some degree. And I think the work that IIT Bombay is working on capture on storage is very important, because large-scale characterization of the geospaces is important. Because if you don't have a spatial map, if you don't characterize, if you don't understand permeability, you do not know what to inject, where to inject, at what scale. So we need to do that. We need to have a lot of simulation and modeling work that needs to be done. There's a lot of monitoring system that needs to be worked on, and well integrity and seismic imaging are mechanisms that are used, which I think is useful to do to get to a real atlas and map of what can be stored across the G20 countries from a storage perspective. I got some time? Okay. This is talked about, Dr. Saraswat and others talked about it in terms of solvent types and the appropriateness in the different solvent areas, pretty well known. And okay, okay, all right. And I think here are two areas I'd like Director Catcher talked about. I think one area that we mentioned in the report is calcium looping. This has not been looked at in much detail, but this is really a scalable option where it's essentially you got a regenerative process of taking a carbonation of calcium oxide and then utilizing that for absorbing CO2 and then canceling that or heating that to release CO2. And this can be a scalable process which can really drive a lot of cost-effective CO2 capture and transportation and conversion and sequestration. Um, Dehydration technologies, CO2 processing technologies is fairly well developed, and I think those TR levels indicate that. I think we just need to look at implementation and system engineering to take this to the next level in terms of transportation. And I think one way to do that, and a lot of countries doing that, especially UK, for example, the Teesside or Humber clusters, you'll see cluster architectures where pipelines and ships and multimodal transport is organized in a scaled economic manner, which allows you to get cost efficiencies, allows you to get large scale and access at a much better manner. And I think that the CO2 processing, dehydration, and transportation technologies can be organized around that, given the level of maturity that they have gotten. And finally, I think some mention of CO2 utilization technologies that we talked about, carbonation and curing, which is basically building materials and construction. And there's some challenges that we need to look through, like compressive strengths, lower suit uptake, and feedstock availability. Fuels and chemicals. For the biggest problem in chemicals is got to do with hydrogen. I can do the reaction. The problem is, where do I get the hydrogen from at scale? At what cost? And so ability to get hydrogen at scale at the right cost structure is very important for e-chemicals. At the same time, CO2 capture technologies to get CO2 at the least cost is again very important. And therefore, addressing right designs, suitable designs, the catalyst systems, reaction designs, reactor designs, and also making sure the hydrogen is available is an important driver towards fuels and chemicals using CO2 as a basic element. And carbon nanomaterials is something that's useful and an area which is at R&D stage, which can go further into development, also giving some utilization. I think, like I said, we need to map CO2 infrastructure, very important. And I think this is a CO2 capture, either CO2 storage, either UR or sequestration, has been happening for many, many decades, right? The United States, for example, stores 70 million tons of CO2 every year for UR. The Snohøvit, what you call CO2 capture system in Norway, has been storing since 1996, 1 million ton per year. No leakage, nothing. So I think this is a fairly safe process. A lot is going to do with public policy awareness. It's like the nuclear problem, right? People think nuclear is very dangerous. That's not true. Nuclear is the safest technology compared to coal, compared to gas, or any other power technologies, right? So I think a lot of public awareness and understanding needs to be driven, and you need to drive CO2 storage as an option from a cost, economics, and adoption perspective. And I think there's sufficient potential in the world and sufficient potential in the countries, we think, which can be utilized for safe disposition of CO2 for storage, which cannot be utilized. So finally, I think just the final slide in terms of what the report says has got to do with, I think, collaboration capture technologies is very, very important. How do we look at cost reduction on the developed technology side from a systems engineering and deployment, and developing of advanced CO2 separation technologies as complements to that. DAC and CO looping are the two key areas. DAC, we think, will take time, but it requires investment at this point of time. And CO looping is certainly a technology which can be looked at large scale CO2 capture using dolomite or lime as the basic element, and which has got, we think, significant potential. And again, the TRL levels can improve somewhat from 6 to 7 to 8 to 9, which is good. And I think first goal is to maximize CO2 conversion. That's obviously the goal. But give an example. Even if you were to convert, theoretically, all the CO2 available on Earth to chemicals, that would only consume 2% to 5% of CO2. So this is the challenge that we have got, right? So we have to have mechanisms which allow us larger vertical products like aggregates to be able to convert more CO2. and of course, enabling policies for market creation for low-C products. Transportation, a lot of hub and cluster architectures for pipelines. And storage, pore space mapping, like I said, pore space mapping is very important for us to move, for G20 countries to move forward in terms of implementing CO2 storage at a large scale over a period of time. And finally, I think all this does not make sense unless you have the right enabling policies, right? So the right PLIs, the right credit systems, the tax systems, if it makes sense in a country like India or other developing countries, needs to be coupled with international cooperation to make this happen. And I think if you look at this from that perspective, I think it's a bright future for CCUS and for economy and the habitat over the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sri Mukherjee, for that very insightful presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker for this session is Professor Dr. Amit Garg from IIM Ahmedabad, the National Investment and Infrastructure Fund and ESG Chair. Dr. Garg specializes in energy, climate change, and sustainable development issues and offers courses titled Carbon Finance, Managing Energy Businesses, Sustainable Finance, Energy, and Environmental Policy, along with Public Management. His current research interests includes carbon and climate finance, energy businesses, corporate accounting of greenhouse gases, energy and environment modeling, water energy nexus. I would like to now invite and request him to kindly make his presentation on CCUS financing needs for critical clean energy technologies. Over to you.
Thank you very much for your kind words. Uh, I am very honored to be here because I see very eminent persons here with whom I have been talking and speaking. And as a country, we look forward to some of these leaders in the industry and policy. I think there is a troika when we talk about. There are three things. First is technology, second is policy, third is finance. So unfortunately, finance comes at the end, but I think finance is the main driver of things. Without finance, it's not possible anything to happen. And if you see and think about technology like CCUS, it is very capital intensive. Where is the money? Where is the money? Countries, developing country, emerging economies, we have very limited finance which we want to use for developmental requirement for our vast populations, provide electricity for all, housing for all, education for all, health for all. We need finance. So where is the money? Government, we have to think and move beyond the government in this. So first thing is multilateral development banks, they have to come up. There is something called, I'm not starting my presentation, but this is the presentation. So multilateral development banks, we have counted about 11 of them. Their total paid in capital is about $119 billion. And as against, which is paid by OECD countries mainly, as against this, they can raise money in the market. They can have blended finance. They can go up to $1.2 trillion based on this. So why not increase this $119 billion to $200 billion? Then they can straight away raise about $800 billion separately, immediately, and give to developing countries, emerging economies like technology like CCUS. So this is the first point which is to be noted. We are at G8, G20 portal and platform. I think this should be deliberated. We are not asking about some other money. This is the money already committed. $100 billion per year has been committed. Give it to MDBs. That is first point. Second point is, if we need finance, please involve private sectors. Without them, it is not possible. It is not possible. And then if we have to involve big corporates. Like we have Mr. Singh sitting from NTPC. They have whatever, I don't know your balance sheet, sir, but you have some money. So you means NTPC. NTPC has some money which can be used to promote technologies. I'm sure you are doing that to promote some technologies, because large scale deployment of this technology demonstration is required. A small 1 million ton, 1,000 tons, that is not going to help this technology. We have to show to the world that we can do a couple of million tons of CCUS or CCUS. The third point here is that CCS is good, but doesn't give any financial value to the guy who is doing CCS. Why not CCU, which is carbon CO2 capture and utilization? Of course, by the way, it is never carbon which can be captured, it is CO2 which is captured. So it is carbon is a solid which can be used anyway. So when we go to produce products out of CO2 captured, so we can have ammonia, we can have methanol, we can have so many things deployed. These would make them green. Green hydrogen, if you use green products, can be used. So who will buy these? There has to be a market. So here comes the policy. The policy angle has to ensure that there is a ready market for these things, and then initially policy will push the technology, the product, market will pull. So once this pulling starts, the subsidies, the promotion can be stopped. That is very important. What we fail is we go on pushing. Why? We have resources for other things. We should use them for other things. So this is, in a nutshell, I've learned, because I teach at a business school, students don't have much concentration power there. So I start from the last slide. So this was the last slide. Now I can start from the main presentation. Of course, people before me have said that this is Paris Agreement. Yes, this is Paris Agreement. I think important point we are missing for business or a country like India, that CCUS may allow coal to continue for some more years. Let us put this up front. Why are we afraid? The world is not worried of coal use. World is worried of negative externalities of coal use. We should be very clear in this, that if we are able to manage the negative externalities, let us do it. There is nothing wrong. Coal, you see, I have never seen a country which has gas not using gas. I have never seen a country which has nuclear not using nuclear. So our country and many countries in developing this part of the world have coal. Why should we not use coal? I think this has to be very forcefully said. Energy security comes before climate security. Any energy is better than no energy. I think this we have to understand. Many countries we are seeing, developed countries, are going back to coal because of this conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Why are they going back if they're saying coal is not required? Germany has promised 40, I'm sorry, I'm taking some names, 44 billion euros for transiting away from coal. They started 2036, now they said 2030. Indian coal industry is 2.5 times than Germany. So if we want to transit, please, you can estimate how much money it will cost for India. 110 or 20 billion dollars will be required. Billion euros, and I'm converting it to dollars, will be required. Where is the money? Who will give the money? You cannot just say, please move away from coal, and there is a embargo on coal financing. Why? You want to move away from coal, then you should allow coal to be used better way. So I think there is a dichotomy in this whole game. Jobs. Coal alone, 15 million jobs. In India alone, 15 million jobs. So if we can continue, why not have it? In fact, we'll develop more if we go for CCUS technology. This is called a marginal abatement cost curve. That is, here is on the x-axis is the cost per ton, y-axis is the total possibilities of mitigation. There are some negative costs, because negative means the benefit is more than cost. So financial institutions are very happy if somebody says, oh, my cost is lower than benefit for over 20 years of time, so please finance, because my revenue streams are very, very clear and visible. cost of CCS is a little high. Cost of CCU is also a little high, much higher, because we are not very certain of the stream of products that will go anywhere. So if we are very certain, and there, as I said, policy has to play a role, that we say that green hydrogen, green ammonia, methanol will be given a priority. We have a solar priority in grid preference. Why not these? We should have some priority on this. So policy support is required before financial markets can take cognizance of these issues. Lot of money is required. These things don't make any sense. No, 10 trillion, 6 trillion, 4 trillion. I've never seen even a million. So I don't know how much a trillion would look like. It is huge amount of money, people say. So when we talk about this amount of money, lot of money is floating around. I was talking in the other forum on BES. $400 billion is the market capitalization of about 160 odd BES companies, battery energy storage companies. Why not CCUS? We should have it. Why not this be reflected on our coal using companies? Why shouldn't their balance sheet go up when they make CCUS? Yes, we should. Why is CCUS not taken as standard carbon finance mechanism all over the world? It is not. So how do we generate finance if we are not considering acknowledging this as one of the major CO2 capture mechanisms? CO2 carbon, you see, CO2, we have done a research, Saraswat Saab knows that we are working on this with NPCIL, PSA and NITI. So it says that a lot of money can be paid through if we are able to monetize the carbon saved. If we are able to monetize, why not? We are not allowed to monetize carbon in that way. We should. So these are, I think, a speaker from Japan was talking about risk. We also handle risk. We also talk about risk in our classes with people who come to take our guys in after MBA. So risk is something which is very paramount. In CCUS, risk could be multiple level. You can see that market failures, capture, transport, storage, hard to abate, all these things would create risk, different type of risk. So it is up to us. How do we manage risk? The risk should be taken up by an entity which is best able to manage that risk at the least cost. That is, if the government says, I will provide you this, good, why not? If industry says, I'll manage this risk, sir, why? Please be my guest on that. So critically, revenue risks are very important, because if you are not aware of how much revenue, how much risky revenue, because risk-free returns in what everybody sees. If there is a big risk, no financial institution will come forward to maybe finance you. So we have to be, there are, because CCUS project, every subcomponent of CCUS, this I worked with Vishal Vikram of IIT Bombay, we have been working quite some time. Every component, subcomponent of this has been in the market for many years. Transport, yes. Storage, yes. Capture, we are developing many things now. So every component and the combined risk may manifest differently, because some risk may bear upon other thing. We know this concept of cascading risk on these, in these. Of course, CCU products will require a viable and stable market. If they have price volatility, if the gas price or oil price is going up and down, who will invest in enhanced oil recovery? Because 1 ton of CO2 put down produces about 1.5 to 1.7 barrels of oil. Take it from me, this is an industry secret. 1 ton gives 1.5 to 1.7 barrels of oil. Now, if oil is running at $50 a barrel, good for economy because we need not import that much money, forex, but project and enhanced oil recovery will sink. At $100, they are very happy of oil. But then as a economy, our country, many countries are not happy at $100 of carbon price, of oil price. Yeah. These, I think USA has made them popular because last year they have released two orders, that sequestration tax credit, investment tax credit. So this has been allowed, and some quite a good amount of carbon price has been established there. $85 per ton, $180 direct air capture. All these things are already available. So for CCUS, if the world is convinced, and we are sitting on a G20 platform, if the world is convinced something has to be done, CCUS cannot be wished away. It has to be there. And for CCUS, policy has to be there, finance has to be there. Finance will follow if the G20 countries are able to take a stand on CCUS promotion. Finance, many financiers are sitting on here in this platform. So, disclosures, yes, there are no clear guidelines for disclosures on this. They have to be GHG, emission avoidance and all those things. I work quite a lot on ESG. So these numbers I'll not enter into because it will open a new Pandora's box. So if we are able to provide this, maybe many fence sitters will jump on the CCUS bandwagon. There are many fence sitters. Yes, let us wait and watch how the government is moving, how the global players are moving. Wait and watch. To avoid this, start viability gap funding for these projects. So I think these are known, people know that these are standard instruments, financial instruments, low cost financing. If we need to really push, we should have 3 to 4% level of financing for CCUS. It is possible, but I think we should have everything else tied up. And international cooperation, I've been talking about G20, 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 but I think we need to move on these issues. Because once you take CO2 and take it on your, let us say, emission trading scheme in the US, suppose a country is outside but is using some boundary, because you don't know once CO2 has been pumped in, where does it go? We don't know. We are not following geological formation that way. Thank you very much. Storage is very much required to be done. We don't have, in many countries, we don't even know where all storage capability exists for CO2 capture storage to be put there. Yeah, this is, we should think about the world. Other countries are also required to be thought through. And if we just want to see conclusion, storage assessment, acceptance in global carbon markets, and G20 level supportive policies. These are the three things I think, and if they happen, finance would flow definitely. And the thing about this multilateral development banks, including their call-in capital, paid-in capital, is very much required, which will immediately spur the market for CCU and any other research. This is the report. We have been very honored to do this report for NTPC Netra, and this has been submitted. So I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Amit Garg, for your very insightful observations, and thank you to both our speakers for their very insightful presentations. So, ladies and gentlemen, we will now move on to our panel discussions. We'll just take a couple of minutes to make the necessary table arrangements. May I request everyone to please settle down? Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to our panel discussion. I just want to welcome our eminent panelists. We have with us Dr. V.K. Saraswat, Member Niti Aayog Government of India, Shri Alok Kumar, Secretary, Ministry of Power Government of India, Shri Gurdeep Singh, CMD NTPC Limited, Mr. Tim Dixon, Director IEA GHG United Kingdom, Dr. Nicholas Musioka, CSIR South Africa, Ms. Yukimi Shimura, Director, MUFG Bank, Japan, Mr. Wim van Gerwen, Vice President from ArcelorMittal, and our panel moderator, Mr. Juho Lipponen, CCUS Initiative from France. Let's have a big round of applause for our eminent panel here. As we move ahead for the panel discussion, I would briefly like to introduce our session moderator, Mr. Juho Lipponen, who's the coordinator of the Clean Energy Ministerial CCUS initiative. The initiative member governments have joined together to accelerate CCUS, and he works closely with the co-chairs and all 14 initiative members and is responsible for running of all the activities of this initiative. I would not like to take any more time. Without any further ado, may I request session moderator to kindly make his opening remarks and moderate this panel discussion. Over to you.
Sit down. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, good afternoon. If you have looked at your watches recently, you will have noticed that we are already past the time when we should have ended. But we have here the panel discussion, and we are going to make it somewhat shorter than the 45 minutes, so do not despair. Lunch is up very shortly. So I am Juho Lipponen, coordinator of the SEM CCUS initiative, and thank you very much to NTPC, Ministry of Power, and the whole India G20 crowd for organizing this meeting here today. The Clean Energy Ministerial is a group of today 30 governments who join together to advance clean energy deployment. It has several different work streams, carbon capture being one of them, and that's the program that I coordinate. India is a very active member of the Clean Energy Ministerial process, and actually this year India is not only host of G20 but is also host of the Clean Energy Ministerial, and I think for the first time a country has been very closely starting to link the SEM and G20 processes. So that's because they are very mutually helpful, and so kudos to India for that. And that was also noted in the plenary session of the Energy Transition Working Party this morning, and so that is an excellent point. And many countries there have spoken about CCUS and the importance of it, and so it is not only us in this room, but also in the other room over there. There's been discussion on CCUS to alleviate that fear of the unknown, as was said already by Dr. Saraswat earlier. So what we propose to do in this somewhat shorter panel than the planned one, we will give the floor to the speaker who hasn't spoken yet, and that's Wim from ArcelorMittal Nippon Steel India in a moment, and then we will come back to a round of questions on what the G20 process could really do for carbon capture, and we will then finish. But without further ado, I would like to invite our panelist who has not yet spoken, Mr. Wim van Gerwen, who is VP for Operations, ArcelorMittal Nippon Steel India.
to provide a few minutes of his views on CCUS, please.
Hello. Yes, can you understand me? I think so. Yeah. Thank you. Good, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to see you in this meeting here. With regard to the steel industry, where I'm working since I was studying, steel industry is 8% of the CO2 production worldwide, and in India even 12%. So I would say we are probably part of the problem, probably also part of the solution. Our company, ArcelorMittal, as one of the biggest steel makers, is very much, and with a huge European footprint, is taking lead on climate change and R&D and all kind of projects to try to mitigate and work in a more green processes. And as such, first we have to know that 70% of the CO2 in the steel industry is basically used to break the iron ore into iron and oxygen. So 70% of the energy just goes to splitting the molecule iron ore. So, and we basically do this with CO, or H2. So there are three ways to make iron, and these are basically, we all use them in ArcelorMittal. The first is scrap-based, very simple, very limited footprint. I'm not going to say more about it because the iron ore is not there. It's only iron already. So there is the 80% or the 70% does not come into question. The second is the most important. The previous speaker said it already, is the blast furnace route. And there we basically work, we can have two elements of working. We can work on the input. What do we use for the blast furnace? And there, this furnace is relatively interesting because you can put a lot of also other materials into it which contain carbon, and as such, you can always also start from waste and from organic material. There are even blast furnaces that work on charcoal and are completely, I would say, sustainable. But this is of course interesting, but what the blast furnace is producing in its output is a mixture of, we call it blast furnace gas. It's a mixture of a lot of nitrogen, a lot of CO, 25%, and a lot of CO2, also 25%. So my company has will start up a project, or will take into service a project now in Europe, in Belgium, where we have a CCU, which was already in a pilot stage tested, but it will be the first industrial installation that will try to produce 80,000 kilotons of bioethanol, ethanol, not methanol, ethanol, out of blast furnace gases. I say bioethanol. It's interesting to explain this with the former speaker. You first have to have a business case. The business case for such an installation, which is $200 million, so it's not peanuts, $200 million. The business case can only come when you have a revenue concept. And this revenue concept had to come from bioethanol sales price. And for that reason, you could not start from fossil fuels. So a blast furnace most of the time works on fossil fuels, so obviously also had to change the input into a torrefacted waste wood and plastics input. So we put these inputs into the blast furnace, and then this installation should provide us bioethanol. How does it work? It's basically a reactor in which the blast furnace gas comes in, and which by microbes, by bacteria, this blast furnace gas is being converted into bioethanol. Most of the time, the CO2 is not converted, the CO is converted. As I told you, CO is a part of the blast furnace gas, and normally CO is automatically burned into CO2 in most of the applications, because these volumes blast furnace gas are so huge that this gas is fatal in the steel production. So we can, with this installation, with this equipment, we are able to, when it starts up well, and it should start up now in the Q1 of this year, should provide us 80,000 tons of bioethanol and sequestrating or CCUing 250,000 tons of CO2. So this is for $200 million. So it's a huge investment, and it's also interesting to know that I was CEO of that plant, and I signed the MOU with a technology provider 11 years ago. 11 years ago. Now you can ask yourself what happened in the meantime. Well, 4 years we worked on the business case to change the rules with regard to what is the definition of bioethanol and how can you produce it? Because normal bioethanol comes from corn, wheat, and so on. So this is second generation bioethanol, which comes from a I would say, which doesn't come from crops, which doesn't come from food, but you can use non-food material to make this bioethanol. And the second 4 years went in the financing, because we had to convince all the financiers that this project was going to work, and it was the first large-scale setup. So another 4 years, and then we built it in 2 years. And we started it up in the beginning of this year. Just to show you how important the previous speaker was with his, and on my side, my Japanese colleague was how important this is. Of course, the next installation, the next equipment will go much faster, because now we will only have to make the business case. We will have, when it works well, we will have a first realization on an industrial base. We can polycopy it in every geography where we want and make bioethanol from waste gases without using corn and food agricultural landscape to do that, which basically is good for the footprint. So this with regard to CCU. With regard to the third way of making steel is doing it via a gas-based DRI route. Now, this is always a little bit difficult to explain, because they say, yeah, India doesn't have any gas. By the way, India doesn't have any coking coal either. We all import it, to be honest. So there is, by the way, you can financially secure gas much better than coal in the coming future. But anyway, what I just wanted to say is that the gas-based DRI route has important advantages over the blast furnace route due to the fact that you can feed immediately with pure hydrogen, 0.1, producing then 0 CO2, or you can sequestrate the CO2, because the CO2 comes out as pure CO2. So it's ready to sequestrate. So we are in India. ArcelorMittal Nippon Steel India is one of the biggest DRI producers in the world, I think the biggest. And we can immediately use make 2-3 million tons of steel with hydrogen. There's only one problem. There is no hydrogen in that quantity available, and certainly not at the right price. So I think we are, it's interesting. It's an interesting setup because we are well positioned, being port-based, as well to import hydrogen as to export probably CO2 for sequestration. That is, in the limited time you gave me, I would say, the story of CCS and CCU in ArcelorMittal.
Well, thank you very much, Wim. Thank you very much for providing with the steel industry viewpoint, providing perspective on what CCUS can do for you, and also pointing out again with your example of the bioethanol plant how much this is not a technology issue, but issue of policies, definitions, and which seem to take a long time to solve in many cases. So that's thank you very much for that. If we think back to what has been said today by all our speakers, a couple of sound bites that will lead to the following question then. Mr. Singh in the very beginning, he said, where there is a huge challenge, there is a huge opportunity. I think a very well said, and we'll be coming back to that. Mr. Kumar spoke about our duty to act boldly. Again, I think something that in this G20 context we should keep in mind. Mr. Saraswat spoke about, he mentioned in one sentence, the fear of unknown, which I think points to the fact that we need to share knowledge and information between countries, between industries, to move ahead with CCUS, because many of the solutions are known by someone else. Tim spoke about countries realizing that they need CCUS. I think that's become much clearer in the past years around the world, and that's what we see also in our clean energy ministerial work. Nicholas mentioned that without policy, very little happens. Again, I think pointing to the fact that governments have a very strong role in launching CCUS. Well, Yukimi mentioned many important things. Most important is cash flow and so forth, but including the financiers from the start, I think is a key point that I retained from her discussion. Again, not an issue of technology, as Atanu Mukherjee was said in his talk, and what Professor Garg was saying at the very end. Finance will happen if G20 countries will take a stand on CCUS promotion. I think it very simply said, but absolutely true. And that leads to the one question we will ask now to all panelists in this final panel. So I would like to have a view from everyone on what are your recommendations or your wishes for the G20 process that we're contributing to with this meeting to drive CCUS forward. What would you like this process to do to take us a step forward? And we can work for our way from Nicholas all the way this way. So Nicholas, please, you first.
Thank you very much for quite a nice summary of what has been talked about here. From my point of view, and I'm speaking this from a technology development space, I think collaboration is a key takeaway message that we really need to emphasize in terms of sharing know-how, lessons learned, and of course, it does not have to be from a research space. It could be failures in the demonstration at the piloting scale, and of course also at the commercialization space. And I think once these lessons are shared, then we avoid a repeat of reinventing the wheel and dragging the entire process too long to a point that it doesn't really make sense. So short, sweet collaboration from an international standpoint. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim.
Thank you very much, Juho. From the G20 perspective, the G20 could encourage further CCUS development, particularly in countries who haven't considered it yet. And there are the funds from the Asian Development Bank and the World Bank, the trust funds on CCS. They are coming to an end this year. And so the donors to those could replenish those funds. And those donors are from the G20 countries, the wealthier ones. And the same with the Green Climate Fund. The donors to that are from the wealthier members of the G20. They could encourage the Green Climate Fund to fund CCS. And the second part of my answer is one of the things that those funds can be used for in countries starting to look at CCUS is to establish centres of excellence. This becomes a national resource for that country to draw upon, to guide the government, but also to pull in international knowledge sharing as well. And we have some good examples. We have IAT in Bombay. We have Indonesia Centre of Excellence. We have one in South Africa. And they can pull in information from not just international organizations such as us, but centres of excellence built on the existing projects, such as the International CCS Knowledge Centre in Canada, which shares the learning from the Boundary Dam CCS on coal power project. So that would be my recommendation to G20. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Mr. Kumar.
Thank you. In fact, I am here to listen to the other suggestions. What could I include in the maybe the working group recommendations? Two things have come out very well. That you also said that if the G20 working group recognizes that there is a need to promote CCUS, then the financing will be easier. That is one takeaway, very good thing. Second suggestion also has come of the Center of Excellence is, I think, is very necessary. Apart from that, in my view, we need to focus more on utilization. Because storage will take time to evolve, develop and all. And as I was talking to CMD and TPC, if we can find say, more value for products of utilization, the impact on the cost of electricity will be reduced to that extent. Maybe two more things we could explore. Is it possible to link these projects to carbon markets? I don't know. Let us have a debate on it. So some part of funding can come from there. And maybe some VGF. So if we have three things put together, say some more cost-effective products of utilization, some financing, I don't know whether it is possible or not, some carbon financing, and some VGF from the government. So if we take up some projects, these are low-hanging fruits. And once you develop a ecosystem, then I think there is sufficient scope for next 4 or 5 years to take it forward. That's all from my side. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar. Mr. Saraswat.
I have a couple of points to add. I agree with my fellow panelists what they have said. Every G20 country has to ensure that they recognize that in their energy transition strategy, there's no other way but to have CCUS as one of the major pathway. Whether they are gas-based economy, whether coal-based economy, or nuclear or fossil, all simulations which have been done for global energy, it has been identifying that fossil fuels will continue to play a major role till about 2050 as far as the energy requirements of the world are concerned. Energy demands are increasing, and as a result, whatever renewable penetration we will do, it is not going to make up for the increased demand. So this has to be understood. Once we do that, in all the discussions which have taken place in COP15, COP26, COP27 as presented earlier in the day, I find that there is a lukewarm introduction of CCUS as a recognition pathway. This lukewarm recognition has to go away.
it has to be identified as one of the primary pathway for abatement of carbon dioxide emissions. If we don't do that, we'll run into problem. Obviously, the methodology, the technology, which are all there today, certainly needs a relook because of the work which was required to have been done in this particular field in the last many decades has not been done at the same pace. Now, since the requirement has come for it to become a major pathway, there's a need for us to accelerate. And this acceleration can come by the cooperative working of the G20 countries. All of us have realized that the development of technologies, commercialization, all this reduction in cost, all this cannot come unless there is enough finances available. In my presentation, I have talked about India having a financial corporation, which is finance corporation, which is supposed to be. I am now giving a much global view to that. Can we create, as part of the G20 recommendation, among the 20 countries what we have today, can we create a financial corporation kind of a corpus fund, which is created from all each country, and then we fund it to all the projects which are required to take the carbon capture, utilization and storage to a level that it is commercially viable not only for the developed countries but also for the least developing countries in the world. If we can do that, it will make a lot of difference. Number two, the work which has been going on today in many areas, as I mentioned, fear of unknown, is mainly because there is no data sharing. If we can ensure that the countries which have been using EOR or CBM and things like that, and their experiences are shared with the people who are now going to adopt these technologies, I think it will go a long way in removing this particular problem. For example, I'll give you a simple thing. There was a time when people used to say that Indian coal cannot be gasified. All the Western information used to be on that. Today, my dear friends, I can show you, India has got today 3 pilot plants where high ash content coal with the indigenous technology has been done. And we are ready to share the data. It has been commercialized. Same was the case when people used to say that the carbon capture cannot be done and is very costly. The NTPC plant which had been set up, Mr. Shashwatam is here, does not give an impression that it is a very costly exercise. The capture of carbon dioxide at the level of $50 per ton, it can easily be brought down to $35 per ton. And there are efforts by IOCL and others where it can come down to even $25 per ton. Now, this data sharing, if it takes place, if this technology sharing, it takes place, all these ideas that CCUS needs huge funding, lot of capex, lot of opex problems probably will get sorted out. Cooperation certainly is the mantra as far as CCUS as a pathway to become a reality in the context of the energy transition for net zero.
Thank you, Mr. Saraswat. Excellent points. Mr. Singh.
Thank you. I think most of the points are included, but I just repeat what I said in the. Without carbon capture and utilization, I don't think net zero is possible. So this is not a choice. The only choice is whether we are doing today or whether we are doing after some time when there is a compulsion. And to bridge this gap, I think it is necessary that this is already a priority. This has come in the priority sector as far as G20 is there. I think it's one of these priority area. It is already come, so that is a very good news. Again, I said that about 10-15 years, people were not believing that solar is going to take off. So let us recognize this fact that CCUS is going to be there, and it is going to be there much faster and earlier than what we are thinking today. The differentiator will be that from the government sides, the policy intervention, and there should be some kind of common policy framework as far as G20 is concerned.
and then making the financing available. I think this goes without saying that any area where there has been a commitment of the financing and it has been taken as a policy decision by the government, that area has really make a leapfrog progress. And this is necessary because without this, we will not be able to go for the energy transition. This has been realized by us as NTPC about 4 or 5 years back, and that is when we started that let's not wait for anything, let's try to put a demonstration plant. So my another request will be that we should start taking under G20 at least 4 to 5 bigger projects which can be kind of done on a commercial scale, not as a demonstration scale. I think that will go in a long way. I'm just coming to the brass tacks that let's try to not try do something rather than go on waiting for something. I think the time has come and we have to act as fast as possible. So the collaboration, cooperation, this policy, the financing, I think this is the part, but I think if the decision can be taken that let's go for 4 or 5 commercial scale, decent size, these plants, that will be a kind of pathbreaker in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. I think excellent points. Analysis and scenarios are important and interesting, but what we need to do now is act and start moving. Yukimi, please.
Yes, yes, thank you. Yes. No, I echo Mr. Shin's comments, and I have actually a long list of wish list. But if I have only one thing to say from this wish list,
One or two.
okay.
You're okay.
Anyway, I would like to ask the government of the G20 to come up and identify where exactly the CCUS play in their decarbonization pathways. Clearly, when and how much they can actually contribute to the national emission reductions and the country's net zero commitments. Now, the reason why is that MUFG Bank is actually part of the Asia Energy Transition Finance Study Group, and this is a private sector initiative supported by the government of Japan. And when the concept is when the company actually approaches the financial institution bankers, we will check whether the project is in line with the government policy. That's the first thing. So if there's no pathway, if there's no identification of where exactly the CCU locates and how it contributes, it's very difficult for the banks and financiers to see what the proposed project by the private sector is something that goes in hands together with the government's policy. And another thing is that we wanted to make sure that the private sector's transition pathway, because they do actually have each company has its own strategies. So we want to make sure that strategy is credible and that whatever they are proposing by using the emission reduction through CCUS is a credible transition pathway by the company that is in line with the government policy. So we need this harmonization, and for that we need every government to come up with their pathway, if possible, sectoral pathways that would actually help. And this is another point that happened in Japan. We have a lot about transition loans and transition-linked loans because the government of Japan actually identified the sectoral roadmaps. And it was easier for the bankers to evaluate the proposal from the private sectors. So I hope the same thing will happen in the G20 countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Yukimi. Wim, final word.
Yeah, I'm not the one who should have the final word, but anyway, I think first we should have a business case. We have the technology, I think. We should have a business case. For the business case, we need a policy. Otherwise, there is no business case. I cannot even go and ask money if I don't have a business case. So this is important. We need to have a policy. and let us start with some projects. We can do them on CCS as well as CCU. I know a lot of people in the steel industry who are venting CO2, pure CO2.
Short but sweet. Thank you very much, Wim, for that. We have to come to a close, I believe, in this panel discussion. So I think it'll just remain for me to thank our panelists for their excellent views and their talks already earlier. And I'm not going to summarize what was said, but I will volunteer the action to actually write up of these points that were said as regards G20 and deliver that to the organizers, and maybe that's helpful in the future deliberations. Thank you very much.
Questions from the audience.
Oh, it seems that the panel has time to and stamina to continue. Of course we can. One or two questions from the audience. Two
questions, not views. Questions.
Two questions. First come, first serve. If there's one hand up there, please stand up, sir, so we see. And if there's a second one as well, okay, go ahead. First one, gentleman in white shirt at the back, and then second, sir, in the waistcoat.
Sir, can you please elaborate on what is the status of carbon? Sir, this is Dr. Prakash Benal from SIT, Siddhaganga Institute of Technology, Tumkur. My question is, what is the status of carbon capture using microalgal technology globally and
Thank you. Let's take the second question as well, and then we.
I'm Professor Milind Rane from IIT Bombay. In fact, I was also going to direct a question on the same thing. Why not algal culture to capture CO2? Because that might be a much cheaper option in doing so. We have some technologies for low-cost transfer of CO2 into the algal culture. Thank you.
In my presentation, I had talked about ocean-based, and algae is one of the areas where we can do sequestration using the growth of algae. And algae has got value addition because it has many products which can be made out of that. But as on today, algae cultivation using carbon dioxide bubbling, particularly in the ocean region, has got problems of tides, problems of instability, and things like that. They have not been solved. But in static tanks, in static lakes, algae formation has been tried out. But again, it's a question of scale, which is not coming out to the right level. And hence it is at TRL 4 right now.
Just to add, I tried this in way back in 2008 in Kutch, Gujarat, and we could not succeed. So I believe, I'm not trying to dissuade anybody, but I think this is like a comparison of the solar thermal versus solar PV. Okay, so anything, I think if you have to talk to the corporates like us, you'll have to go for a techno-commercially feasible solutions.
Myself, Dr. P.P. Kulkarni from NTPC.
Excuse me, just Nicholas or Tim, anything more on the algae? No. Okay, no. Sir, please.
Myself, Dr. P.P. Kulkarni from NTPC School of Business. My question is how the patent issue will be addressed? Issue of patents.
I think, Jana, like any other thing, probably we'll have to sort out. I don't think anybody can sort out that problem.
There's the question. Thank you.
Well, while we're at it, there's one more hand up there, and that's the final question. Gentleman in the middle there, please.
Thank you, panelists. This is Vipul Gupta, young professional from Niti Aayog. My question is on the priority areas, as you were listing down what the G20 may proceed with to promote CCUS. As a young researcher, I would expect a sort of geospatial atlas for storage available throughout the globe so that I can see where the feasibility is, how much feasibility is. So if geospatial mapping of the storage potential could be there, that could be useful just like the solar or wind potentials we are saying. Thank you.
I think it's a good suggestion. And in India, we are already up to that. I think Professor Vikram Vishal and our team is already working on mapping the entire country. I gave you some numbers where all storage feasibilities are there in north, south, east, west, everywhere. But more fidelity, higher fidelity on this is being achieved through the activities which are IIT, which are driven by IIT Bombay. But G20 can also take that as a task for ensuring that we have a global mapping.
Thank you. Tim, did you want to?
Just to add, that is a very good suggestion. And the issue is that not every country has that data, has that knowledge. So countries should be encouraged by the G20 to assess their geological storage potential. And there was an initiative already that OGCI, a collaboration of oil companies, are trying to put together what's known at the moment in terms of storage for different countries. There's a piecemeal picture around the globe, but they're putting that together, so you can refer to the OGCI website for their Global Storage Atlas as a starting point.
Excellent. Very good last question. We shall add that to the G20 list. Go ahead, madam.
Yeah, I am Rajeshwari, the director of NTPC School of Business. I have a question, particularly to you, Kimi, that you were talking about the PPP model. And I also see that many of the marginalized countries have not yet gone up to the map of CCUS. So how are we going to have the inclusion plan, A, and B, how we are going to look up to the PPP model? Thank you.
That was a tough question. Is anyone would like to answer those questions? Or should I?
I have some views which are contrary to what you presented. So, but still I will air them. PPP is a good approach, but PPP, as I think many presenters have done, is an exercise which can be done when there are very, very clearly identified revenue streams and demand. Unfortunately, as on today in this particular sector, the revenue streams are not so well defined, and we have a problem. That's why my views are contrary. But certainly there is a scope for the private participation. At one point in time, for example, today, what NTPC has done. Now, this is a proven technology today that yes, it can be scaled up, and there are products like methanol, what he is making. There's a market very clearly defined for green methanol today because International Maritime Organization has already made sure that nobody will use heavy oil and diesel in the ships and all that. And as a result, more than 15 to 20 methanol plants are coming up today in Europe and America and other places to feed the green methanol for that. And mind it, green methanol is at least 1.5 times more costly than the normal methanol. So this kind of a stream, if it is available, private investment will come. Same thing will happen tomorrow in the storage case, utilization case, where aggregates can be manufactured. And I think the technology, again, NTPC is developing. It will certainly have a huge revenue stream and private participation can be done. But unless a revenue stream is defined, participation is not likely to happen. Sorry, my views are slightly.
Actually, my point of PPP is assuming there's a revenue scheme. So I think we are in the same line. Yes. No, so we're talking about the same thing. Anyway, yes, whether it is carbon pricing or not, we're not the philanthropy kind of organizations, private sectors. We have to make money. We have to generate the revenues. And that we have to have a good economic sense. Where exactly the revenue is coming, we at the end of the day, the CCU products, for instance, needs to be sold to someone in India or outside of India. Those products has to be attractive enough for them to pay for the CCU products. How can we make it? I think this is a key questions we need to ask to everyone. And it's not just the government's responsibilities. I think it's the private sector's responsibilities too. Hence, it's a PPP, the public-private partnership.
Yeah. If I can ask to the panel.
Can I ask this last question?
Let's see, panel. Are we done or?
This question is for Ms.
Sir, we're
Shimura.
going to discuss over lunch.
Okay,
I
thank
think
you.
panel's capabilities
is
as
over.
it currently is have been
Thank you.
exhausted. So thank you very much to
So,
everybody
Ms. Shimura, take
for,
come for me
your,
over the, lunch.
thank you.
We'll request everyone on stage to kindly remain with us. We have a study to release. Ladies and gentlemen, the study on carbon capture and utilization technology gaps in international collaborations was commissioned by the Ministry of Power, Government of India, and under the G20 India presidency, and the responsibility was given to NTPC. I request distinguished dignitaries on the dais to kindly release the study. The study report was prepared by Dastur Energy in collaboration with the knowledge partner DST, sponsored National COE CCU, IIT Bombay, and R&D Center of NTPC, Netra. Thank you. I will still request dignitaries on the desk to remain with us. Ladies and gentlemen, as a gesture of our appreciation to our esteemed speakers and dignitaries for sharing the time and expertise with us, we'd like to felicitate them, and to do the honors, may I please request Sri Alok Kumarji to kindly felicitate our speakers. Firstly, may I request him to felicitate Dr. V.K. Saraswat. I request Sri Alok Kumar to kindly felicitate Dr. V.K. Saraswat. I now request Sri Alok Kumar to felicitate Mr. Tim Dixon. I now request Ms. Yukimi Shimura to please come forward. May I now invite Dr. Nicholas Musyoka to please kindly come forward. May I now invite Professor Amit Garg to please join us. Professor Amit Garg, please. May I invite Mr. Atanu Mukherjee to please join us. May I request Mr. Wim van Gerwen to please step forward? May I request Mr. Juho Lipponen to please step forward? May I request Dr. Vikram Vishal to please join us on stage? Thank you, Shri Alok Kumar, for felicitating our speakers. May I request Shri Gurdeep Singh to kindly felicitate Shri Alok Kumar. Let's have a huge round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. And now may I invite Shri UK Bhattacharya to please come on stage and felicitate Shri Gurdeep Singh. May I now invite Shri Sashwatam to please come on stage to kindly felicitate Shri Bhattacharya, Shri UK Bhattacharya. Thank you. I'll request our dignitaries to kindly remain on stage with us for just a few moments. May I please request you to kindly remain with us on stage? Thank you. I'd like to invite Professor Vikram Vishal, our dignitaries to kindly remain on stage with us for just a few moments and request dignitaries to please remain with us on stage. May I please request you to kindly remain with us on stage?
Hello, everyone. Very good afternoon. Yeah. So I represent the global community of researchers on CCUS, and I also represent the DST-sponsored National Center of Excellence in Carbon Capture and Utilization at IIT Bombay. I also represent my country, India, as the nation hosting the current G20 presidency. So on behalf of NTPC Netra and Ministry of Power, I'm indeed privileged and honored to be standing here in front of all of you to express the vote of thanks at the G20 International Seminar on CCUS. We are deeply grateful to all the notable dignitaries on the dais and off the dais who have made it convenient to attend this event. The essence of India's presidency, as derived from the ancient Indian text Maha Upanishad, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which stands for one earth, one family, and one future, emphasizes the country's vision for the world towards a better tomorrow. Developing CCUS ecosystems through strong international collaboration in innovation and deployment, as envisaged and emphasized multiple times in this G20 seminar, shall develop commercially scalable next generation clean technologies in the sunrise industry and with a lot of mutual cooperation. The seminar comes at a time where interest in CCUS is growing in India and in the world. As highlighted by our eminent plenary speaker, Dr. V.K. Saraswat, that globally close to 300 projects are in various stages of development across the CCUS value chain, underpinned by strengthened calls to meet the net zero goals and new policy initiatives. Sir, we are very thankful to you for your insightful and a very holistic lecture, highlighting that the decarbonization of hard to abate industries would require outstanding efforts to achieve the climate goals, and emphasizing that as G20, we are all committed towards the net zero goals. The issue of economy-wide decarbonization is complex and challenging. Without CCUS, the challenge becomes increasingly more difficult and costlier. In this regard, CCUS has several important roles: avoiding emissions lock-in from existing power plants and industrial facilities, addressing emissions from the heavy industries, providing flexibility in the power sector especially as the share of intermittent renewable increases, providing a negative emission solution, and enabling the production of low emission materials and fuels. For bringing these out lucidly to the audience, I express my gratitude to the eminent speakers of the inaugural and the plenary sessions, Shri Alok Kumar, Secretary, Ministry of Power, Government of India, Shri Gurdeep Singh, CMD, NTPC, Shri UK Bhattacharya, Director Projects, NTPC, Mr. Tim Dixon, Director, IEAGHG from UK, Dr. Nicholas Miuska, CSIR South Africa, Ms. Yukimi Shimura, Director, MUFG Bank, Japan, and Mr. Win Van Gerwen, Vice President, ArcelorMittal. We are truly grateful to you for sharing your thoughts and enlightening the gathering with your knowledge. Your support has enriched the event with confidence in unraveling the know-how in CCUS. The burgeoning CCUS sector will create significant employment opportunities for delivering a cleaner industrial growth. However, an actionable CCUS development and deployment plan for each emitting sector, market assessment for products from the captured CO2, development of a detailed geological storage atlas pointed by one of our young professionals out here that can map the emitters with the storage hubs, CO2 transportation network, robust financing and policy mechanisms, transfer of technologies, effective communication and societal awareness, and strengthened public-private research and innovation partnership will be essential to accelerate the development and deployment of CCUS. For sharing their knowledge in these directions, I would like to thank our distinguished speakers, Sri Atanu Mukherjee, CEO, Dastur Energy, and Professor Amit Garg, Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, who made excellent presentations to bring out the issues and opportunities surrounding upscaling of CCUS technologies and making this seminar interesting and enriching. A special thanks to my colleague, Mr. Juho Lippanen from Clean Energy Ministerial for very, very effectively moderating the panel discussion, bringing out the key understandings surrounding the state of knowledge and promise for deployment of CCUS in near future with cooperation for all the G20 nations. It's my honor to express my gratitude and recognize the efforts of those who diligently worked to make this event a success. I extend my heartfelt thanks to the organizers of this seminar, the team from NTPC Netra and the Ministry of Power. Can we have a big round of applause for the team led by Mr. Shashwatam? Your tireless efforts in bringing together the leading experts and stakeholders from around the world have resulted in a productive and insightful discussion on this critical issue. We are grateful to all the delegates for the opportunities to exchange the ideas, to learn from one another, and work towards identifying meaningful solutions for mitigating the impacts of climate change, in particularly through CCUS. All our participants and experts who have joined online today, there is a huge rush on YouTube, I saw, and they are also very thankfully acknowledged. A special thank you to the volunteers at this venue in Taj West End, Bengaluru, for your invaluable contributions in managing and controlling the event, thereby making it a success. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you all have benefited with the deliberations of the seminar. I'm assured that you have learned a lot on CCS today by none other than the global subject matter experts from the G20 nations. Thank you once again for your time and participation in this seminar on the very topical theme called carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you for your warm vote of thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, with this we conclude the program. May I now invite everybody to kindly join us for lunch and have a great day. Namaskar.